Okay, welcome to the Wpial Blitz Show. My name is Bruce Badgley. As always, I'm with my good man there, Ian McMeans. And Ian, we have another very special guest with us tonight to open the show.
Yes, we are thrilled to have Penn Hill's head coach Charles Morris coming off a big win over Aliquippa. These two schools have had some joint practices together and scrimmages over the last few years, but had the game on the schedule this year. And the Indians ended Aliquippa's 16-game overall winning streak in a winning streak over Wpial opponents that was 29 games that stretched all the way back to week 2 of 2021, if you can believe that. The Quip's last loss to a Wpial opponent was against Central Valley 3 years ago. So congratulations on
Wow.
the victory, coach, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So preparing for a team like Aliquippa, they've got obviously the history and the tradition, but they've had some turnover from their team that won the state championship last year too. So, you guys obviously have a very talented squad. You've been close in a lot of games this year, just barely lost to North Allegheny. It took like 250-plus-yard field goals by their Alabama recruit kicker to beat you guys. So you've been in a lot of games. How is your confidence level heading into this game against Aliquippa?
I think our kids are always very confident. I think, we were watching film of our week 0 game and our game against Woodland Hills, and we just seen that, we were having some self-inflicting wounds, some penalties at the wrong time, a few, dumb penalties that you go through when you have a lot of turnover. Like we lost a lot of senior guys, with some guys like Julian Duggar, Mir Key, Carter Lance, Kelsey Huntley, Cameron Thomas. We lost a lot of veteran guys to Juan Bandy. So we knew that we were bringing in a lot of young guys, and then we got a few transfers in. So we knew it was going to take a few games for us to kind of start building a little chemistry and finding the right niche and moving some key pieces around. We little mixture of things at quarterback. So we knew we had to find that right niche of players, as well as that right fit, and then seeing what the players do well, and then now we're kind of hitting a little stride here. But we one thing we wanted to do was make sure our guys were competing and playing hard, and they never lost confidence, even starting the season 0-3.
Yeah, you're definitely hitting your stride. That's for sure. And when we talk about that, obviously, there's so much. Obviously, you talk about the X and O's aspect. You talked about the chemistry. Talk about the emotion. How are you going to keep, your team? Obviously, this is a huge emotional win for you. You've got an important part of your schedule coming up. How do you keep your guys even keel going in, out of this big win with Aliquippa to stay focused on some of these, week by week as you go through this kind of murderer's row of a schedule?
We always tell our kids to go take it one game at a time, one week at a time, one practice at a time. It's so funny because I said that after our game against Aliquippa, enjoy tonight, but the real work starts on Saturday, which is our recovery practice and kind of like a walkthrough. Heading into the stretch of conference play, starting with Shaler. That it's time to really refocus and kind of up our energy even more and our focus even more, heading into this conference stretch.
So what do you think has been, you said you were working some new players in now and are starting to hit your stride. What do you what do you feel like the identity of this year's team is? Because obviously when you had, Julian Duggar, dual threat quarterback, Pitt commit, all that stuff, relied a lot on a kind of balanced offensive attack. And you guys have always had, I kind of have called Penn Hills the cradle of cornerbacks or the cradle of defensive backs, because you guys always have a really strong secondary. But what's kind of the identity of your team this year now that you've kind of started to figure out all the roles?
Well, I think we lean on a lot on our some of our seniors like Natel Mitchell. I think with the quarterback position, with Julian, we were able to throw a lot of terminology, a lot of concepts, a lot of stuff at him. Whereas though now we're kind of simplifying it for some of our new quarterbacks, and then even Devin who transferred in from Shady Side Academy, him and Jay Mayer, we kind of just played to some of their strengths and not overwhelmed them with a lot of different concepts and terminology. We kind of simplified some of the offense, so it fits for them. And then just kind of, I think this year we have a lot of depth at receiver. which we didn't have, I think, my first 2 seasons, but we had a lot of depth on the offensive line, a lot of experience the previous years. And then we were always able to lean on Julian with making, those unscripted plays work out. So now we're leaning heavily on our receivers to make some plays for our quarterbacks, with a couple of transfer guys like Carter Bonner, who's a big-time receiver. Derek Selby Jr. has been awesome for us, playing in the slot in a couple different positions we had for him. And then Martell Palmer has been making some plays for us the last 2 years. So leaning heavily on our receiving crew because they have a lot of depth.
You just went through the whole definition of team chemistry there, and how no, but I mean on how you're molding your personnel on this year's squad with your play calling to, come up with that, that secret sauce that, can translate, to wins on the season. And with that, how do you pick that up? I mean, how do you pick up that type of chemistry? Is it through practice? Is it through game reps? Is it, through the team building? I'm sure obviously all elements play a part, but what do you think is the biggest aspect in developing that team chemistry so that you can put the best product out on the field week in, week out?
Um, I think first, leaning heavily on my coaching staff. They've been awesome. My offensive coordinator, Charles Bradley, my defensive coordinator, Lavon Wesley, and my receivers coach, Gary Nolan, defensive line coach, Trayvon Hester, linebackers coach, Dan Mason, Teddy Blakeman, leaning heavily on those guys' opinions and their voice for, the development of some of our kids, their strengths and weaknesses. How can we utilize their strengths to the best of our abilities? So leaning heavily on and trusting my coaching staff. And then also, secondly, the players buying into, a different role that may not have been asked of them the previous week or coming into the season and kind of having them, maybe sacrificing a different role, and the kids have bought in. And, I think that's, we're seeing a little bit of success because of it.
So one of the things we like to do on the show is to give shout outs to the guys on the field who really make things happen, but don't get a lot of accolades, namely the offensive and defensive lines. So you talked a lot about your great receiving core and all the guys that have made big contributions to the offense. But if you want to take a minute to shout out to the guys in the trenches, because we're big believers that that's where things happen on the football field.
Oh man, our offensive line has been playing outstanding. We had a young guy, Jaden Jones, coming stepping in, replacing a big time guy and Kelsey Huntley. Tristan Davis, stepping in, filling in roles for Carter Lance and Andy McCoy. Cameron Price, our left guard, he's been playing extremely well. And then our right side has been, our veteran crew that started last year, Donovan Burnett and Gerald Jones. So they've been awesome, and they've been playing really, really well for the most part. And that's why we've been able to, move the ball when we need to offensively.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about too, on your defensive side of the football, how you think that your defense, and especially against Aliquippa, kind of translates to offense.
I think that was probably one of the best weeks of practice we had. Those guys were locked in their film study. Something that we do that's kind of unique with our coaching staff. We monitor and we always challenge our kids' film study. So we kind of do it by like a position group type of challenge. Whoever's position group has the most film study may have to do less sprints or something like that, just to challenge the kids. I think their preparation and making sure that they were responsible for their role and their assignment for that week was very, very evident in the play. I think, our guys were locked in. And I think that's a huge part of it. I think the guys studying preparation and believing in our game plan, approaching Aliquippa for that week.
So you mentioned a little bit about Shaler, coming up here. They just had a game against Woodland Hills where they played on a Saturday afternoon, which is kind of typical for Shaler. Their, homecoming game, they always do it in the afternoon. Do you think, obviously Aliquippa is a tough physical team, having that extra day of rest, do you think that's going to be beneficial for you guys heading into Friday night?
I definitely think it helps with recovery a little bit. But these is high school kids. They're 14 to 18. They don't need too much time to recover. Now we're older guys. It's a little different. We need that time to rest and recover. But these are young teenagers. They're fine. They'll recover. Then they don't. It don't take too long for them to recover.
Yeah, and talk about, obviously there are the individual goal week by week of winning the game or whatever like that. But there obviously are some long-term or season goals that you have, as a head coach. Talk a little bit about what some season goals might be for, your football team.
Well, our expectations is always first, make the playoffs, win the conference. Hopefully we get a shot at the Wpial championship and state championship. If that's not your mindset as far as coming into the preparation for the off season, maybe this isn't the program to fit you, I guess, because we always want to work like champions, and if that's not your mindset, I don't know why you play a sport. We're always trying to achieve the highest goal, and we work towards it in the off season, from our strength and conditioning program to our summer conditioning, to everything we do is always high levels, where our practice is scripted and laid out. Everything is very, very structured and detailed. And we challenge our kids, but we do it with love and care, but we also challenge them to be the best they can be, because we set our goals pretty high for ourselves. And I think a lot of teams should. You come to the season, I don't think no one is expecting to come try to be a loser. We expect to all be champions.
You got a final question for Coach there, Ian?
I asked everything I had on the top of my head. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us tonight, Coach. We really appreciate all your time, and congratulations on the big win over Aliquippa, and best of luck this week against Shaler and moving forward into conference play. You guys have, racked up a couple conference titles, and hopefully you can make a big run in the playoffs this year too.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. That's the goal. So hopefully we keep this thing running. But our conference is pretty tough. 5A is pretty tough. So we just got to keep preparing and making sure we take care of our bodies.
Next time I see Ron Corsi, I'll tell him that we met on the podcast here, Coach.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Just go ahead and
Thank
exit
you.
out then, and best of luck.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, take care now.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. All right. Wow.
Great.
Pretty incredible stuff,
Yeah. So
that was the say what game. I mean, there's always what I call a say what game in Pennsylvania, and their win over Aliquippa was the say what game for me last week.
And it wasn't they ran out to a 21-0 lead. I mean, they were beating Aliquippa pretty handily. The Quips came back and scored a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter, but Penn Hills dominated that game for the vast majority of it. And the other thing I think was really impressive about what Coach Morris talked about was about how he's adapted his playing style based on his players. I think the most successful high school programs, the most successful coaches we've talked to have always been the ones that have not been stuck in their system. It's no, this is the system we run. This is what we do. And everybody's going to fit this. It's, this is the talent of the players that I have. And, especially when you're at a public school and your, player selection is based on who lives in your community. It's not a private school that can go out and, maybe find a player that would be willing to
we need a running.
Find a player that might be willing to come to your school to fill a need. The public schools are really much more dependent on just what's available, and I think being adaptable is a mark of long-term success. And Penn Hills has won their conference title the last couple of years, and has been right in there for playoff contention. Made it to the 5A semis last year, so they're right in the mix once again this year. And it's going to be interesting. We'll talk about this a little later in the show, but now that we're getting into conference play heavier in a lot of these leagues, how things are going to start to shake out, because we've seen, a lot of really good teams like Penn Hills was earlier, have to play some really tough schedules. And like Coach Morris said, 0-3 didn't define them as a team. They played really difficult teams, and they got some guys back from injury. They weren't at full strength when they played Susquehanna early in the season. And now they're kind of moving forward, now that they have a full roster that's kind of gelled together and kind of figuring out those roles. The other thing I want to mention about Penn Hills is The guy who runs their Twitter account, his name is Bill. He is awesome. The PHQB Club Twitter account. So not only does he like live stream and broadcast all their games on YouTube for free for anyone, he has archived almost all of their old games on the Penn Hills YouTube channel. So like he converted like VHS tapes of Penn Hills games from the 90s that you can go onto their YouTube channel and watch, which is just if you're a football history nerd like me, it's amazing that like people as a labor of love of something that they just did in their free time, like converted all these old VHS tapes into digital formats that are now out there and available for people. So if you're a Penn Hills fan or a fan of a team that played Penn Hills, at any point, basically from like the mid 90s on, you can go onto Penn Hills YouTube page and check out this whole archive of old videos of games, which is a really cool thing to be able to provide for the fans.
And and those guys are the unsung heroes of high school football, in my mind. I mean, when you run into those guys, boy, those are the ones that you become friends with in a hurry. Because if you ever have a question, especially me broadcasting games, my buddy Bill over at East Pennsboro, I mean, with all the detailed stats and previews and everything else that he sends out, you know, there are those guys, and we as fans appreciate what they do so much because it just lends itself to that much more enjoyment of the game, having more background. And with Coach Morris being a legacy there, playing or graduating from, Penn Hills there, I mean, you can just feel the enthusiasm. You can feel the devotion to the program. And that's just a great thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad we were able to get him on because Penn Hills is a program I feel like we've talked a lot about over the years, but we haven't had them featured on the show. So I'm glad we were able to feature them tonight, coming off their big win over Aliquippa.
Yeah, and another Wpial coach who has ties to District 3 there, and so
I know. It's yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania high school football, regardless if it's Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, I mean, it's tough, hard-nosed, enjoyable football. You can go anywhere around the
absolutely
state
right.
and have a great time on a Friday night watching the game.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man, you got control. Let's get this puppy started.
All right.
Or
Well, we've got a lot to kind of roll through tonight. So here we go. Thanks to
strap it in,
everyone for
baby.
tuning in and to Penn Hills head coach Charles Morris for joining us. If you've joined us on YouTube, you obviously know where to find us, but you can also follow us on Twitter and interact with us there as well. In the live stream chat tonight, if anybody has any questions, comments, we're going to go through a lot of information. So feel free to throw out some questions if you have any for us.
Yeah, please do. And any new fans joining the program today, thank you very much. Tell your friends about us. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff here tonight.
Yeah. So our biggest win of the week was obviously the Penn Hills victory over Aliquippa that ended their 16-game winning streak. A good, solid victory for Penn Hills to send them into conference play here in 5A as well. Two games of the week, Newcastle and Knock went back and forth. Newcastle scored 22 unanswered points in the fourth quarter, basically, to come back from behind and beat Knock. Had a big performance from both their running back and wide receiver. Receiver actually returned a kick for a touchdown as well. And then Bishop Canavan and Cornell were in an absolute battle all night, and Canavan went for it on a fourth down and threw a long touchdown pass and wound up winning the game. So big win for Canavan there in 1A as well. I had a hard time picking the upset of the week this week because there wasn't really a game that stood out to me as a real upset. I picked Ambridge over Greensburg-Salem. Both teams were kind of out of the playoff picture last year, but had been off to decent starts this year. Greensburg-Salem was unbeaten. But I think the margin of victory there was the real surprise was that, I kind of saw it as a toss-up game, but Ambridge winning by 19 points was quite a bit of a surprise. So congratulations to the Bridgers. They're starting to turn their program around a little bit, so that's pretty cool to see. Some other noteworthy results: South Fayette, following up on Coach Spieler being on the show last week, went to the beach at Bell Vernon and won by 10. Another impressive performance from their quarterback Drew Wahorski. Montour,
it's almost time for maybe next week to put panic button back in, because I think that I'm thinking panic button time here for Bell Vernon. What are you thinking, man?
Well, we'll talk a little bit about them. We'll talk a little bit about them later in the show when we get into the conference schedule, but I'm not ready to panic on Bell Vernon yet. But they play TJ this week. So let's see how they do against TJ. Yeah, I think
I'm saying. I mean, okay.
Yeah. Montour did it in all three phases against Mars. Imani Christian had a late touchdown in the fourth quarter to beat Highlands 12-10. Central Valley turning things back around after their 0-3 start and just pounding Beaver. South Park last week beat Steel Valley 7-0. This week did it the other way in an absolute shootout against South Allegheny. Fort Cherry, guess who's back? Matt Sieg. He had that broken thumb early in the season, was just a running back. Well, guess what? He's back at quarterback. He threw a couple touchdown passes this week. So Fort Cherry back to their full strength. And then Leechburg absolutely throttling Jeanette. Those two were kind of the last two playoff teams in that conference last year in the 1A Eastern Conference. But I thought Jeanette was better this year than they were last year, but Leechburg is also even better this year than they were last year. So great victory for Leechburg there. Their quarterback, Jaden Floyd, has been doing it on the ground. He's had over 200 yards and 5 touchdowns for like 3 straight weeks now. He's just
incredible.
Doing awesome. But our player of the week comes from Bethel Park. Javon Moore, their running back, had over 200 yards and 5 touchdowns against a pretty good Trinity team. So this was actually in the KDKA Showcase Game of the Week that our friends at KDKA Radio did. So, you had the full broadcast crew there, and Javon Moore, who's been an absolute stud this season, just put on a show, and he was just unstoppable in this game.
Yeah, just burst through that hole there. I mean, left everybody in his wake. And it's not like doesn't need great vision to get these yards. I mean, just incredible football acumen on display here.
Yep. And he's got a really good mix of power and speed too, that, he's obviously got the foot quickness to find these holes, but and short area quickness like we see right there, but also the power to kind of run through guys like we saw in that second touchdown as well, that he had to grind his way through the middle of the defense and was able to get there.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Yes. I mean,
so
understand why he's got those things out on highlight tape. Wow.
And additionally, to staying true to my word that I said, if you put up 6 touchdowns, I will show your highlights on the show. Ryan Messina, quarterback from Elizabeth Forward, had 6 total touchdowns, 5 passing, 1 rushing against Baldwin. So I will also show his highlights on the show to stay true to my word. This Elizabeth Forward team, they had some tough games in non-conference play, but now this was also a non-conference game against Baldwin, but now that they're going to get into conference play, I still expect pretty big things out of them.
It's going to be really interesting. I think that there is such depth of talent that it's going to be difficult, I think, for just one guy to really stand out. But he's sure doing a great job so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So Javon Moore from Bethel Park was our overall player of the week, but also congratulations to Ryan Messina from Elizabeth Forward on his 6 touchdown performance against Baldwin. So running through the rest of our players of the week, or top performers, I guess I should say, Gino Mazzacco from Neshannock had a 5 touchdown game, 3 passing, 2 rushing. Cole Olszewski from Bishop Canada in that tight game against a really good Cornell team put up 300 plus passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Kayvon Gardner, running back from Newcastle, I mentioned that Newcastle knock game earlier, had 4 touchdowns. Chris Smiley from Elwood City did it on both sides of the ball, scored in 3 different ways, 2 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, then a fumble return touchdown on defense. And then Robert Lenzi from South Park in that shootout with a very good South Allegheny squad had 1 passing touchdown and 3 rushing touchdowns with 180 plus both passing and rushing. So all in all, some very good performances this past week.
Yeah.
All right. So our streak watch overall, we have now
Gonna run out of streaks.
well, we running out of winning streaks, I guess. We've reached the point now with Aliquippa losing to Penn Hills, their 16-game winning streak came to an end. So no one from before this season it now has an active winning streak. So Aliquippa's winning streak that stretched back 2 years because they went undefeated last year as state champions. Now the only teams with a winning streak are these 12 remaining undefeated teams that I have, or 5-0 teams, I should say, because there's a couple 4-0 teams. So these 12 5-0 teams that I have listed at the bottom of the slide. Also, 3 of the defending Wpial champions from last year have winning streaks versus Wpial opponents, but they have a loss in there that happened. Actually, all 3 of them in the state championship games last year to teams from out east. So we do still have some streaks, but no longer an overall streak that stretches more than 5 games. But you never know who's going to come out of the woodwork and continue and go on a big run here. The one thing I will note, though, is, and you'll see it too, Bethel Park, Upper St. Clair, Peters Township, and South Fayette, all 4 of those are in one conference in 5A. So that's just going to be a murderer's row. On the losing streak side, Charleroi and Baldwin continue to stay atop the table, followed by Springdale and Valley. Quaker Valley and Valley played a head-to-head game, so Quaker Valley getting off the schneid and winning a game, and then Sarah Catholic also with a very convincing win over Summit Academy. Sarah had a pretty tough non-conference schedule that they had to work their way through. So I think they'll be just fine as well. So we'll see how those play out. And now that we're into conference games, we had several non-conference games this week among our active winning and losing streaks, but no streaks broken in either direction here on this one. But as we get into the thick of conference play here, something will definitely
that'll
keep an eye on.
change.
Yep. So this is the midpoint of the season. We have played 5 games. We have 5 regular season games left. So now in week 5, all Wpial teams will be well, I guess I should say every conference will have conference games because conferences with 7 teams obviously have an odd number. So one of them is going to play a non-conference game, but pretty much everybody's playing conference play from here on out. So this is where the playoff races really start to heat up. And for the first time this year, we're going to run through all of our conference standings. Some of them are still very loose because we've only had either no games or like 1 or 2 games, but we'll keep an eye on these things as the season rolls along as well. So just some real highlight games of the week that we want to hit on just to keep an eye on when we go through the standings. North Allegheny playing Central Catholic in 6A. That's a rematch of the last 2 6A championship games. So that should be a good one. That one probably will decide the conference title in 6A. In 5A, matchup of unbeatens between Peters Township and Upper St. Clair. Yeah.
Before you move beyond the North Allegheny Central Catholic game, of the week there, how much pressure do you think is on Central Catholic? I think that there's enormous pressure on Central Catholic to win this game, to reassert themselves as the dominant 6A program in the Wpial. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is, Central Catholic beat North Allegheny pretty handily in the regular season last year, and then North Allegheny came back and beat them in the playoffs. So I think, both teams lost a bit to graduation. So I think this is a really good kind of measuring stick game for both teams to kind of see where they're at as far as the season goes. But really, these are the top tier teams in 6A. So this may be a little more of like I don't want to say a warm-up game, but it's almost
the game
like
that really matters is in November.
Right. Yeah, they're head and shoulders better than everyone else in 6A. So you're right. The game that really matters is in November. So this may be one where, both teams want to win it, but it's not like it's going to give them any home field advantage for the championship game because the championship game's at a neutral site. So some of this is just seeing how you stack up and then also seeing what you need to fix between now and November. And I think last year, we talked to North Allegheny's head coach before the state championship game and talked to him a bit about, how much did that first loss to Central Catholic help you realize what you needed to work on for the rest of the season? Because they did make some adjustments that played out later in the year. So I think this is kind of a game where it's more about seeing where your weaknesses are than necessarily what the result is, because I fully expect these two teams to meet again.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah. And there is pressure. I mean, Central Catholic has, tremendous expectations every year. They're a program that expects to be competing not only for Wpial titles, but for state titles. And it's been 4 years since they won a Wpial championship. So
it is the single most prevalent question that I get from fans out in the East is what's up with Central Catholic?
Mm-hmm. I think it's they just haven't been able to get over that hurdle in the championship game. In 2021, that Mount Lebanon team was awesome. That was a great team that just ran the table, won the state championship, beat St. Joe's Prep. The last couple years against North Allegheny in the championship game, they've been close games, and NA's just pulled them out. And Coach Walker just knows how to win games. I mean, he comes from a tradition that his dad was a Wpial and state championship winning coach. Now he's a Wpial and state championship winning coach. So, Coach Walker knows how to get it done in the postseason, and North Allegheny had a really strong group of players there. And it's not a knock on Central Catholic at all. I have tremendous respect for Coach Lehmeyer there, and the passing game that he's been able to instill at Central has put up some big numbers. So we'll see how this game plays out. I'm very interested to see how it sets the table for the rest of the season.
Okay, let's move on. That's
all
good.
Right. So in 5A, a battle of unbeatens between Peters Township and Upper St. Clair. Over in the Big East Conference, Woodland Hills taking on Latrobe. We talked about that Bell Vernon TJ game being the big game in 4A. In 3A, Highlands and Deer Lakes, and Central Valley and Avonworth. That Highlands Deer Lakes game is big because Highlands coming off that loss to Amani Christian. Deer Lakes still vying for that conference title as well. So if Deer Lakes wins, that potentially sets up a Deer Lakes Amani showdown for the conference title a little later in the year. Central Valley coming off that win over Beaver. Now, if they can beat Avonworth, that would put them really in the driver's seat for that conference title. But if Avonworth beats Central Valley, and Avonworth did beat them last year, then that potentially, changes things and opens up some other possibilities in that conference. Seton LaSalle taking on Waynesburg, South Park taking on Washington in 2A, and then Monessen against Southside Beaver in non-conference play, and then the Clairton-Jeanette rivalry game on Saturday in 1A is the big one. So this week, broadcast from our friends of the show, the KDKA News Radio team will be at Baldwin for that Central Catholic North Allegheny game, and then our friends at WMBS out of Uniontown as the 4A Big Six conference gets underway. This game between Laurel Highlands and Char Valley is kind of a big game because we all think that TJ and Bell Vernon are the top two in that conference, and the top two are guaranteed playoff spots, but the third place team is kind of in it for the wild card potentially. So I don't want to call this a wild card elimination game, but the loser of this game is going to have a really hard time, making a case for the playoffs. So a big one to kick off conference play between Laurel Highlands and Char Valley. So looking across the Wpial, the one big change that happened this year was that rather than defining everyone making the playoffs just by where they finish in their conference. In 6A, it's just the top four because there's only 7 teams. But in all other classifications, the Wpial committee is going to select a couple wild cards to get in. So in 5A, 3A, and 2A, the top 3 teams from each conference automatically get in, and then the committee will select a few wild cards. It's different in 4A because there's only 8 playoff teams because of how the 4A teams enter the state bracket. So in 4A, only the top 2 from each conference automatically get in, and there's only 2 wild cards after that. So it's a really tight playoff race in 4A. So those non-conference games matter. How you've performed, against other strong opponents in 4A matters, and these conference games really matter because only the top 2 are guaranteed to get in. And then in 1A, it's the top 3 from every conference plus 4 wild cards to round out a 16-team playoff field. So let's look at our conference standings. Thanks to Chris at END2008 on Twitter for these awesome graphics.
Incredible stuff.
Yes. So he took the standings page on my website, which I had usually just screenshotted for this, and made it into a really cool graphic. So thanks, Chris, for making an awesome graphic for our conferences. Or for our conference standings discussion. So in 6A, there's only one conference, but you've already started to see that separation a little bit. Top 4 are going to make the playoffs. And really, this is North Allegheny and Central Catholic are in a tier by themselves at the top. And then it's, we've talked about it's between Seneca Valley, Canon-Mac, Norwin, and Mount Lebanon, we think, for the other 2 playoff spots. Mount Lebanon is really struggling this year. They're 0-5. They've had a lot of turnover between a new head coach, between a lot of new starters on their team. They're trying to kind of rebuild the program. They just barely lost in overtime to Canon McMillan, which if they had won that game, like they lost 17-14, I really think that could have been a confidence building victory for Mount Lebanon. So we'll see where it goes the rest of the way. I think Norwin could still be a factor in the playoff race here, but Norwin's already lost to Seneca Valley. So really, like, Norwin's games against Canon-Mac and Mount Lebanon are almost playoff elimination games for the last playoff spot.
Yeah.
Okay. In 5A, no 5A. All right. So actually, no, that's not true. So no teams in the Allegheny 6 conference have actually played a conference game yet. Now, this conference is absolutely loaded. So the good news is, as opposed to last year, where last year, there were only 8 playoff teams in 5A. This year, it's changed up a bit. The 5A champions moved back in the state bracket to enter in the quarterfinals again. So like it was 2 cycles ago. So 12 teams are going to make the playoffs in 5A, which opens this up a little bit more. This conference could legitimately get 5 teams in. Look at this. There's 4 teams that are 5-0, and then Moon is 3-1. And Moon would be 4-1 if their game against West Allegheny hadn't been canceled because of lightning. Like, Moon was up 14-0 on West Allegheny when that game was canceled due to lightning. So this conference is loaded, and the Allegheny 6 conference has had a team in the Wpial championship game, I think, for 6 straight years now. So 6 or 7. So this conference produces good teams. Peters Township's the defending Wpial champions. Bethel Park was the top seed a few years ago, and they're just annihilating people right now. Upper St. Clair, is averaging over 40 points a game. South Fayette's playing very good football on both sides of the ball. Moon is a tough, gritty, hard-nosed team, and Baldwin's bad. They're still rebuilding. They're just bad. But this, 5 of these 6 teams are really, really good, and any one of them could make a very deep run in the playoffs this year. So every game's going to matter here. This is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. Peters Township against Upper St. Clair this week, and the Moon Bethel Park's a good one too. So every week we're going to be talking about a big game in this conference.
It's going to be fascinating to me to see how the committee will see these teams come the end, because I think you and I both know that these guys are just going to, it's going to be a knockdown, drag out. It could take 2 losses to win this conference. And then what does the committee do in seeding these teams in the postseason? I think is just a fascinating, going to be a fascinating story to watch as the season evolves.
Here's what I'll say. If anyone gets through this conference undefeated, I guarantee they'll be the top seed in 5A.
Well, that's hard for me to imagine with such talent out there, but
yeah. But if Peters runs the table again as the defending champs, and or if Upper St. Clair or Bethel or South Bay, if any of them run the table in this conference, I have a hard time seeing anyone else being the top seed in 5A, other than the conference champion here. Now, if they all start beating each other, that changes the equation a little bit.
Right. If there's no way to connect the dots, which I think is what's going to happen. I think that there's going to be no clear cut, cut way to say that team's the favorite, because I think they're all going to have a difficult time in going through A, undefeated, or B, even with one loss.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well,
it's going to be tough.
and let's not forget what happened last year, that Peters ran the table, and then Bethel, Moon, and Upper St. Clair finished in a three-way tie for second, and they all had, two losses because they'd all lost to Peters, and then they all beat each other. So, and that was why Upper St. Clair missed the playoffs with an 8-2 overall record, because they lost the tiebreaker there. But the tiebreakers are going to be important for who comes in those top three spots that are guaranteed a playoff spot.
Yeah,
But
Allegheny 6 going to be fun to watch this year.
Yep, yep. But the wild card leaves some doors open too. So in the Big East Conference, Franklin Regional off to a 2-0 start with very solid wins over Gateway and Latrobe. So did it in two different ways. Last week they beat Latrobe 3-0. 2 weeks ago they beat Latrobe 3-0, and then this past weekend beat Gateway. I think it was 36-34. But Franklin Regional was up big, and then Gateway stormed back and scored like 27 points in the fourth quarter in that game. So, Franklin Regional gave up some points late in that one. I think Woodland Hills is the best team in this conference, so we'll see how everything starts to play out. But Latrobe's also a very good squad, and you should never sleep on teams like Penn Trafford or Gateway either. Armstrong's got a really good quarterback and passing game, so they could always pull an upset too. So this is going to be really fun to watch. This is a really deep conference. Actually, all 7 of these teams finished 500 or better last year. And a couple of them moved up from 4A to 5A. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out this year, because this is another one where you could have a lot of teams start to beat each other. Gateway takes on Armstrong this week, Woodland Hills against Latrobe, Kiski against Franklin Regional. So we'll start to see how things start to separate over the next few weeks. But from the early looks of things, it looks like Franklin Regional is very solid, but they've won 2 very close games. Woodland Hills, we know they're good. Kiski looks like they're kind of struggling a little bit in conference play, but there's always upsets or things that can happen as we go through.
The non-conference schedules, mean everything, I think, for the Allegheny 6 to really, maybe get some priority over the Big East,
Yeah.
in seedings as well as teams that make it. But let's see how the conference schedule works out. I can see somebody running the table in the Big East, which could be beneficial to them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if Woodland Hills, Woodland Hills and Franklin Regional are the only 2 unbeaten teams in conference play. I think that's going to be a really good game when they play in a few weeks. Woodland Hills was my preseason pick to not only win the conference, but I'm pretty sure they were my preseason pick. It was either them or Pine Richland maybe to win 5A. I picked someone other than Peters this year, but I did something different. But no, I think Woodland Hills is the best team in this conference, so I think they have a pretty good shot of running the table here. But they've got to get past a really good defense in Latrobe this week. So
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
other thing is there's a lot of strong teams here. And then in the Northeast Conference, Penn Hills got that non-conference victory over Aliquippa this past week. Pine Richland off to a very strong start. And I want to talk about North Hills here too for a minute, because North Hills, has just narrowly lost a couple games. Narrowly lost to Pine Richland a few weeks ago. I think that was a 29-24 game that Pine Richland needed a late field goal to kind of put it away, or it might have been a safety. It wasn't a touchdown. They scored some late points to put it away. And Penn Hills is now starting to click a little bit too. So the top 3 here are very strong teams, and these are teams that could make some noise in the playoffs too. So don't sleep on any of these teams. Pine Richland has a win over Central Catholic already under their belts. So
Yeah.
Don't sleep on the Rams either.
I think I'll be honest with you. I think that win by Penn Hills was huge, in this format, because it's going to mean so much in the perception, this perceived strength of schedule, coming out with that win, and it's going to be a tough here between these 3 conferences here in 5A for sure.
Absolutely. And I think the other just sort of interesting footnote to the Aliquippa Penn Hills game is that, Aliquippa was, well, the state attempted to force them up into 5A this year. So I'll say Aliquippa was slated to play in this conference this year. So if Aliquippa had not filed their appeal with the courts and defeated the PIAA in the courts, then they would have been in this conference. So that would have been the Penn Hills
Yeah.
Aliquippa game would have been a conference game. And so I think that's just an interesting little footnote there that could have been a conference game if things had played out differently during the off season.
Yep.
All right, on to 4A, where there are 3 conferences in 4A, and all of them have 6 teams, so none of them have played any conference games yet. So I just organized the standings based on overall record. That's not an official tiebreaker according to the Wpial. So, this will change a lot as time goes on here and we start to play some conference games. But TJ, Bell Vernon this week, those are the best 2 teams in this conference. I fully expect those 2 to be the 2 that get the playoff spots. So the important note here is only the top 2 get into the playoffs for sure. And then there's just 2 wild cards spread among the other third place or other teams across 4A. So the, Ringgold Trinity, Laurel Highlands Central Valley, those almost become, wild card elimination games if you assume that TJ and Bell Vernon are going to beat everyone else besides each other. And we'll see pretty early right now this week on who the top dog is in this conference is because Bell Vernon's playing TJ.
Yeah, I think that's good. That game in and of itself, I think, is going to set the tone, at least for the Big Six conference.
Yeah, absolutely. The winner there becomes the clear favorite to win the conference. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, 4A, the 4A teams this year, you'll see this, you'll notice a lot of teams with losing records here. And in the next conference, the Greater Allegheny Conference, I'll just flip there, West Mifflin at 2-2 because they had one game canceled due to weather is the only team at 500. Everyone else has a losing record. And that's not saying that Mars and McKeesport aren't good teams. They just had brutal non-conference schedules. But when you start to look at wild cards, things like that may play into it. And then in the Parkway Conference, some of these teams had a little bit easier non-conference schedules and played some teams in lower classifications. That's not to say that these aren't good teams because these teams have had some impressive victories too, but it's going to be interesting to see how when we get into conference play, these things start to shake out. Do you have a 1-4 McKeesport and a 1-4 Mars team suddenly go on a big run here? I think this Mars West Mifflin game is a big tone setter for this conference this week in the Greater Allegheny for potentially, who could get that second guaranteed playoff spot.
Yeah.
Because I think McKeesport is a really good team. I mean, McKeesport's lost a couple close games in overtime. So I think McKeesport is still the favorite in this conference, but this Mars West Mifflin game's a big one. And then in the aforementioned Parkway Conference, we have an undefeated Newcastle team, which, I mean, how awesome is this for Newcastle? They won 2 games total the last 2 years, and now they're 4-0. We talked to their head coach a few weeks ago. It's his first year there, Coach Mazzocco. He's doing an awesome job, and they just had that big come from behind victory to beat Knock, which, potentially if you start to look at wild cards and things like that, like if Knock finishes 3rd in the Greater Allegheny and Newcastle finishes 3rd in the Parkway, the Wpial could look at that and will be like, well, Newcastle beat them head to head. So that's who we're going to, give a slight favorite edge to for the wild card as well. So all those non-conference games do matter. Montour's a very strong team. Aliquippa just losing that game to Penn Hills this week. But like I said, this will start to sort of sort itself out as more conference games start to happen. But lots of good games this week on the slate too. Newcastle against Aliquippa, good historic rivalry game that's going to set an early tone for how well Aliquippa stacks up with their conference opponents as well. I do think Aliquippa and Montour are the top 2 teams in this conference.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with what you said there, but as you said, I mean, the whole transformation of Newcastle to irrelevance is, I mean, put a whole new light on the Parkway Conference.
Absolutely. And it's great for Newcastle too. They're one of the winningest programs in Wpial history, one of the oldest programs in Wpial history. So it's just cool, it's better when teams like that with that much rich history and tradition are playing well.
Well, I like it when there's really three or four teams in it, because then you really get that round robin kind of championship format thing going, and boy, that's always a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and the playoffs in 4A with only 8 teams are really going to be the cream of the crop. It's going
Yep.
to be, I mean, it's going to be a murderer's row once you get to the playoffs. Of just getting to the Whippeal championship game is going to be tough.
Yeah.
All right, so on to 3A in the Allegheny 7 conference. Deer Lakes and Amani Christian are the two unbeaten teams after Amani edged out Highlands this past week. So Highlands taking on Deer Lakes this week. And, that's a big game because Highlands is not out of it for the conference title yet. Potentially, if they beat Deer Lakes and then Deer Lakes beats Amani Christian, you get into that kind of three-way tie scenario like you were talking about. The good news here is the top 3 are guaranteed playoff spots. And then there's 3 wild cards that'll come from the remaining teams across 3A. So Deer Lakes, Amani Christian, Highlands, Freeport just got a pretty solid win over Burrell. They blew them out. So some good matchups this week too. Amani playing a non-conference game against North Catholic, and then the teams kind of in the bottom half playing each other as well. Valley against Freeport and East Allegheny against Burrell.
Wow.
In the Interstate Conference, only 6 teams here, so they have not played any conference games yet. But this is one where I think non-conference scheduling has played a big factor because, coming into the year, we thought this was Elizabeth Forward's conference to lose. And I still think that, but they played a tough non-conference schedule with some really good opponents. And so Elizabeth Forward right now is sitting down at the bottom of the standings with a 2-3 record, but I fully expect them to turn things around. But like Greensburg Salem at 4-1, Southmoreland at 4-1, they're playing some good football right now between those two teams. So there's going to be some good games here down the stretch. York is playing much better this year. Mount Pleasant's a solid team. Derry's playing pretty good ball. So all these teams are playing pretty solid football. But I think if Elizabeth Forward can come through and run the table here, they'll set themselves up very well for the postseason.
I mean, I get that. I don't see them going 5-0, and I think they're going to have to go 5-0 to, I think, um, at least get that wild card or a decent seed there, because I know that they played some tough teams preseason, but coming into the conference schedule at 2-3, your back's kind of against the wall there.
It kind of is. It kind of is. I think Elizabeth Forward is the most talented team in this conference. I will sort of pat myself on the back a little bit because I think I said in our season preview show to watch out for Greensburg Salem because I like the talent that they were returning. And, right now they're off to a 4-1 start. So, and Southmoreland too, they were a team that had a 40-year playoff drought that they snapped in 2019. And now they've made the playoffs 4 out of the last 5 years,
Yeah.
but are one of just 2 Wpial programs who's never won a playoff game. So Southmoreland really looking to take that next step this year and win a playoff game. That's their definition of success. Whereas Elizabeth Forward, who's made the semifinals last year, they're looking at potentially trying to make a run to the championship game this year because they brought back Ryan Messina, who just threw for 6 touchdowns, and Charlie Nigut, their running back, who's really, really good. It's just, and Chris Climbs in the trenches. Elizabeth Forward has some really good players. They just gotta, buckle down now that they're into conference play. All right, in the Western Hills Conference, this one is gonna be fun. Central Valley getting that big win over Beaver this past week brought them back. I mean, Central Valley started 0-3, and now they got that win over McGuffey and a win over Beaver. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, Central Valley is who we thought they were. They're really good. But the Wpial did them no scheduling favor. Central Valley basically had to start the season playing like 3 teams that are probably going to be in the 4A semifinals this year. So they had a tough road to start. They started 0-3, but they've bounced back. North Catholic also off to a 2-0 start in conference play, but still have to play the other top teams. Avonworth, who's won this conference the last 2 years, is a really strong team in this Central Valley Avonworth game. Avonworth beat Central Valley last year. Central Valley was in 4A, so it was a non-conference game, but they've played each other the last couple seasons and know each other's strengths and weaknesses pretty well. So Avonworth Central Valley, this is going to be a real good matchup this week.
Yeah, it really is. It's I think it's even though it's not undefeated teams, I think it's the one that I'm kind of focusing in on a statewide level. I think that whether Central Valley will or will not be a player, back on the 3A state stage, I think it will be in large part determined by how they do against Avonworth this week.
Yeah, I think definitely the winner of this game becomes the clear favorite to win this conference title and potentially get a top seed in 3A. I mean, it depends on how Amani Christian does. If Amani runs the table, I think they're the number one overall seed just because of how non-conference play went. But I think, even being the number 2 seed gives you a pretty strong path to the championship game. So I think the winner of this one becomes the favorite in this conference and really starts to separate themselves in that top echelon of 3A.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, on to 2A in the Allegheny Conference, where South Park has defeated their top 2 challengers, in my eyes at least, to winning the conference title. So Olsh really the only one still hanging out there. Olsh has a pretty good defense. Their defensive end, Van Cavals, is really good, and he also plays quarterback for the Chargers. So South Park right now in the driver's seat in this conference. South Allegheny, off to a solid start at 1-1, and that's another team. We had their head coach, Coach Hansen, on a few weeks ago, and they won 2 games all of last cycle. And
now, wasn't Coach Hansen honored by the Steelers last week too?
He was, yeah. Is their one of the Steelers do like a Coach of the Week award, so he won one of the Coach of the Week awards too. So congrats to Coach Hansen there too. And South Park's playing really good football right now. They've got a pair of twin brothers in the trenches who are just outstanding at offensive and defensive line, and a good running back in Eric DeRue, a solid quarterback in Robert Lindsay, who is on our list of players of the week, a slot back safety in Kenyon Brown, who can do a lot of different things for them. South Park, I think, not only is the clear favorite here for this conference title, but I think has to be considered now one of the favorites I think it's South Park and Seton LaSalle are the 2 clear favorites for the 2A Wpial championship as well.
Yeah, Steel Valley can be the spoiler here. I don't think that they've really got a shot at, anything, postseason wise, but I think they could be the spoiler here this year.
Yeah, Steel Valley has a chance to make a run here, and they just have to start putting everything together. They've had a couple injuries and stuff, so I think Steel Valley could make the playoffs, because remember, the top 3 make the playoffs, and Steel Valley's only played 1 conference game. So if they go on a run and start beating teams, I think they can get back into it. But it has to start for Steel Valley. Has to start this week against Shadyside. They've got to beat Shadyside this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the Century Conference, Seton LaSalle and Keystone Oaks, who are schools that are actually across the road from each other, interestingly enough, at the top of the conference here. But Seton LaSalle, I think, has played a lot better so far overall this season. I think they are the top team in 2A right now. With it's either them or South Park. So one of the 2, they're my 2 favorites. Washington had a little bit of a hiccup against Waynesburg 2 weeks ago, but Waynesburg just got absolutely thumped by Steel Valley, and so did Washington in non-conference play. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. I think, Waynesburg taking that next step as a program and competing for a conference title here is great after they just made the playoffs last year for the first time in over a decade. So I think Seton is the clear favorites in the conference, and I think Washington and Waynesburg are probably going to be the next 2 that make the playoffs. KO's kind of, KO's 2-0 in the conference, 2-2 overall, but look at their point differential. They're minus 34 points in their point differential. They beat the 2 bottom teams in the conference just barely. So I don't think KO's as good as their record is right now. I think they're gonna slide back a little bit. And then in the Midwestern Conference, Beaver Falls, I think, is the big surprise this year. that after winning the Wpial title last year, off to an 0-5 start and just really struggling offensively, not able to put anything together, hasn't been able to stop anyone on defense. But that's really opened things up for some other teams. Elwood City off to a 4-0 start. Western Beaver with their sophomore quarterback, Wpial, who's just lighting it up. He set the Wpial freshman passing record last year. So this is going to be a really good battle to kind of see who fills that void that Beaver
Yeah.
Falls has left now that they're not playing as well as they traditionally have.
Yeah, and it's not like they're not going to have opportunity. Beaver Falls anyway to be a spoiler. That's another team that I think could come on against obviously some of these opponents here and play the spoiler role. So
they certainly did in the playoffs last year. I mean, they went from the number 10 seed to winning the Wpial title, but I like Western Beaver here. I think Western Beaver has the most talented player overall in the conference and their quarterback, Wpial. But Elwood City, I mean, what a great story that program has been. And we talk about them every week about how they went from the long losing streak to then making the playoffs and snapping their playoff drought to now they're 4-0 and competing for a conference title.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, say no more. We really need to, obviously through this improvement with Elwood City. I mean, they've gone through a coaching change as well. But I think featuring them one week is not far off.
I think it is coming soon. All right, on to 1A. In the Big 7 Conference, Southside Beaver is the defending conference champions, lost to Fort Cherry in the Wpial title game last year. But Neshannock moved down from 2A to 1A, and those two, I think, are the best two teams in the conference. The surprise to me here is Rochester, who's always been a very strong competitor in this league, off to an 0-4 start this year. Another team that just hasn't been able to put it together offensively. They lost a game to Laurel this past week, who came in winless, and I think it was 23-17 they lost. So or no, maybe it was 23-13, so something like that. But nevertheless, Shenango's been solid in the middle of the pack. But I think this one is Steel Valley and not Steel Valley, sorry, Southside and Neshannock are the top two here in the conference. The one other thing to note in 1A, which I think is interesting, is the top 3 teams are guaranteed playoff spots, and then there's 4 wildcard spots that are going to be open. So potentially, depending on how the Wpial looks at things, you could have a conference that only gets 3 teams in and a conference that gets 5 teams in, just depending on how things shake out here.
Mm-hmm.
In the Black Hills Conference, this conference is absolutely stacked. I mean, you've got Fort Cherry, who with Matt Seg, back at full strength now, really took it to Monessen this past week with a 35-14 victory. Monessen had been undefeated, and Monessen jumped out early in that game. They were up 14-7, and Fort Cherry just stormed back and rattled off 28 unanswered points. So Fort Cherry is as good as advertised still. Bishop Canavan with that win over Cornell in a hard-fought game, and Cornell's a very strong, very solid team too. So the top 3 here are really good, and Monessen's a really good team. But don't sleep on Sarah Catholic either. They've got a good quarterback in Quadir Stribling, a good wide receiver in Darian Washington. So I think if there's a conference that's going to get 5 teams, it could be the Black Hills Conference with those 5 that I mentioned, depending on how the Wpial looks at the wild cards, if Sarah can go on a little bit of a run here. Okay, in the Eastern Conference, Clairton is really, really, really good. Clairton has not given up a single point on defense this season. I know it says 7 points against, but those 7 were on a pick 6. So it was, Clairton's defense has not allowed a single point this year. Leechburg's offense has been lighting it up. They've got 2 really strong victories over Riverview and Jeanette.
Not any more than what Clairton's been lighting it up. Holy cow.
Well, yeah, and Clairton, I mean, Clairton's just loaded all over the field. They're just, and these 2 teams kind of seem like they're on a collision course because Clairton's already beat Greensburg Central Catholic, And if Clairton gets past Jeanette this week, that Clairton Leechburg game is going to be must-see TV in a few weeks. So, circle that one on the calendar. Leechburg has a very bad Springdale team this week. I have, some family that lives in the Springdale area. I feel bad for what's happened to Springdale's program. They're just really struggling. I mean, to only score 6 points through 4 games, that's just
Yeah, that's
brutal.
not good.
They're really struggling. But Clairton, Leechburg, Greensburg Central Catholic is also a very good squad in the middle of the pack there, and Jeanette's good too. So some stuff could happen here. And Riverview, this Riverview GCC game is interesting to me because Riverview's kind of rebounded from that, bottom tier team to being a mid-tier team the last few years and has just barely missed the playoffs the last couple of years. So they're really looking for that signature win over one of the top teams to kind of put themselves really into that playoff conversation as well.
You didn't say much about Jeanette, but I think that they're, primed to make a good run at it this year too.
I was really high on Jeanette coming into this season, and Leechburg just took him behind the woodshed. I mean, they beat him 35-13 this past week.
I get it.
So
I get it. But I mean,
yeah, that
you can still have a bad game and still in this format, I think, get into the postseason with a decent seed and then take it from there. So I'm not saying they're winning it, but it's hard for me to imagine that we're not going to see at least one, maybe two postseason wins for Jeanette.
It's very possible. I mean, they've got the offense to do it. The question for me now is their defense. They, because Leechburg did it on the ground. I mean, their quarterback Jaden Floyd ran for 200 plus yards and 5 touchdowns. So it's can Jeanette stop someone's running game is the big question for me for Jeanette. And and it's a season for a reason, right? It's not single elimination knockout.
Sure,
you play a regular season because you try and get better each week and improve. And if Jeanette can improve their run defense by the time they get to the postseason and can peak then absolutely they can go on a run. But where we sit right now, halfway through the season, I need to see Jeanette be better at run defense.
We'll take it.
Finally, the Tri-County South. Jefferson, Morgan, and California and West Green are all off to 2-0 starts, but I think those top two are the top two teams in the league. They don't play each other till week 9, so they both could potentially run the table until then and then face off for the conference title in week 9. But we've got a game with West Green and Jefferson Morgan between two teams unbeaten in Tri-County South play. This is the conference that I think is going to present a very interesting decision for the Wpial, because the Tri-County South has always been the one that's been, struggled in the playoffs. Maybe they only win one playoff game. Maybe they don't win any in a given year. So the top 3 are guaranteed playoff spots. The Wpial's always kind of discounted the Tri-County South champion as far as seeding goes. So I'll say these are kind of traditionally not thought of as strong teams.
A league there.
So yeah. So if the Wpial decides to give 4 wild cards to the 4 fourth place teams, they could do that. But if they decide to not give a 4th place team a wild card, I think it would be the one from the Tri-County South. And I think that's where you could get 5 teams from one of the other conferences, whether it be the Black Hills or the Eastern Conference, in over a 4th place team from the Tri-County South. So I think that's going to be something interesting to keep an eye on as the season moves on as well. All right. So our rankings, mostly unchanged since last week. I think the only real difference here is what we did in our 4A, 3A rankings. I kept Aliquippa at the top of my list, even though they lost to Penn Hills, because Penn Hills was a 5A team. So I think Aliquippa is still really good. And Aliquippa's star running back, Tyke Hayes, the Penn State commit, did not play in that game because he was nursing a hamstring injury. So I think if Aliquippa is fully healthy, then I still think they're better than all these other teams on the list. So that's why I kept Aliquippa at number 1, even though they lost this week. I know you discounted that and moved them down just a little bit.
But, even with that, I mean, in the 4A, 3A rankings, we still have the same 5 teams, just in different order. I mean, and I don't see what teams, obviously you're you see what I send across to you, but I'm not really, I don't really see, how you're doing it there. I think probably the single biggest differences we have is maybe in the lower part of the 2A, 1A rankings, where I've got South Allegheny and Monessen yet. And then you've got Canavan. Canavan was, I mean, it was, yeah, I was definitely thinking about Canavan there, but yeah,
Yeah. Yep. And these are just for fun. These are our,
sure,
off
right,
the cuff
exactly.
power rankings. So
They're gonna
yeah,
play it out.
yeah, we'll play it out and see where things go. But we did something a little different with this year. Trying to split it up into 6A, 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A. But I think there is a really, if you had to ask me, like the biggest gap between classifications, I think it's actually between 4A and 3A. Like the level of competitiveness in 4A and the assets those schools have, and the facilities and all that versus what some of the 3A schools have. I think that's the biggest gap between classifications is 4A
Yeah.
versus 3A, which made it really tough to try and combine those two into one set of rankings. But I think that is the biggest gap between classes this year.
Yeah, and clearly, I think the closest is 2A, 1A. I think that
Oh yeah,
they're
I think
very interchangeable.
and honestly, I think there's probably at least three 1A teams that could win 2A this year. I think Clairton, Fort Cherry, and maybe even Canavan, although Canavan lost head to head to Seton LaSalle. But I think, Clairton and Fort Cherry, I think those two teams could compete with Seton LaSalle and potentially win 2A if they were in 2A this year.
Okay.
All right. So our Wpial look back. We are in week 5, so we are on to 1954. For those who have followed the show, you know that we go to a different decade each year. So now we are at 70 years ago. As we progress through time, moving closer towards the current day in 2024. But 1954 was the beginning of Braddock's dynasty. Braddock won 6 straight Wpial titles in the mid 1950s and had what was the longest winning streak in the Wpial until Clairton broke it in the 2010s, I guess. Yeah, 2009 through 2013. Clairton had that 68 game winning streak. So I had to make sure I got that right.
Wow.
But Clairton was declared the Double A champions here as the only undefeated and untied team. Thanks to our friends at PA Football History for finding these newspaper clippings. So I thought this one was interesting on the Clairton one that entering the final week of the season, Clairton, Duquesne, and Jeanette were all undefeated. And Clairton beat Duquesne and Jeanette lost to Greensburg. So Clairton was the only remaining undefeated, untied team. So kind of won the title by default, by elimination, because the way it worked back then is they had a Gardner point system, and the team with the most points would just win the title if no one else had tied them. But if there was another team that was tied, then they would play a championship game. But I love this quote in the newspaper article. It says Clairton High School has its third Wpial Class AA football championship because, like Alexander the Great, it has no more worlds, or rather teams, to conquer. So what a quote to lead off a newspaper article with.
It's that's a little bit too, maybe I don't know. I mean, dramatic.
No, it's awesome. It's great.
It's just, what, I guess that's what sports writing was, back then, is it had to be, really embellishment of teams, but anyway, especially ones that's declared the champion. They can't win it. They got to be declared the champion. So what do you got to do? You got to embellish then, and so that's just the way it was, as Walter Cronkite used to say.
That's true. That's true. So that Clairton team was coached by their legendary coach, Neil Brown, and the stadium at Clairton was Neil Brown Stadium forever after Coach Brown's tenure. But just last week, Clairton announced that they're doing a stadium renovation project, and the new stadium, it's going to have turf, it's going to have new lighting, new seating, all that stuff will be Tyler Boyd Stadium, thanks to a generous gift from Tyler Boyd, the Clairton great, who played in Pitt and now in the NFL. And I remember following Tyler's career from the time he was a freshman, and just incredible stuff. I mean, Tyler's team lost the first game of their freshman year against Laurel and then won the next 65 games. They won 4 straight Wpial and state championships. I mean, that's just unheard of. They won 65 straight games in his career. It's just, and he was lighting it up as a freshman. You could tell this kid was special from the time he stepped on the field as a freshman. And so it's so cool to see that the school's going to be named after him, or the field's going to be named after him.
And I got to see him in the Big 33 game, after his senior season, and he was just remarkable. Had a rushing touchdown, had a receiving touchdown, had a kick return touchdown, and I got a picture. My daughter was cheerleading on the cheerleading squad that year, so I got a picture of him and my daughter and they both went to Pitt, and they kind of stayed in touch while they were out there and that. So great guy, great career, and everything that he's done, my gosh, just incredible.
Yeah, and he's if I had to say, in my lifetime of players that I've seen play, I always say that Tyler Boyd, Terrell Pryor, and LeVar Arrington are the 3 best high school players I've ever seen play. And that's not to discount anyone else or anyone that played before my lifetime, but guys I've seen play with my own eyes, those are the 3 best high school players I've seen play in Western Pennsylvania. And Tyler Boyd was just one of the most electric players with the ball in his hands. I think his high school highlight tape might still be on YouTube. If you go back and watch it, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's like watching a high schooler, or even it's like watching a college kid play with like middle schoolers, but they're all high school kids. He's just that much better than everybody else. It's ridiculous.
I don't really have a third. I have a 1 and a 1A, at least, out here on the eastern side that I saw play with my own eyes. Number 1 was obviously Micah Parsons, and quite honestly, number 2, Nick Singleton. Big time company. Obviously, Nick with obviously stories still to write, but the Micah Parsons in what he was in high school was just one of the transcendent figures, in high school football, if not in Eastern Pennsylvania and the entire state.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are when you said, I have 2, I thought Nick Singleton's definitely going to be 1 just because of everything he did. Yeah. The other history look back that I wanted to mention was this South Huntington winning what was Class B, later became Single A championship. So talking about newspaper articles embellishing, the first paragraph here says, South Huntington High, a little heard of team from Ruffsdale. And so they're now part of the Yawk School District, kind of south of Greensburg, around just outside of Mount Pleasant, very rural area still now. So you can imagine 70 years ago, it was even more rural, but went undefeated, beat McDonald 20-0 in the championship game. So, I thought that was a nice little tidbit of this team effort for South Huntington to win the Wpial title. And this is the only title in Yawk's history. So, kind of cool stuff there.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yes. So we've talked for a long time tonight, but if you want to hear us talk more, you can check out our other podcast that we're on. So I have a Steelers podcast that I'm a part of. Our show airs on Thursday nights on YouTube or anytime on any platform. And then Bruce has his Fresh Set of Down show that's about Eastern Pennsylvania football.
Yeah, that will be, it's Tuesday nights at 7:30. And we're actually bringing in some of the. We're going to start doing some of the power rankings, basically, kind of showing people where everybody stand in the power rankings from each particular district. Since Wpial show is just one district out of the PIAA. Each our fresh set of down show, we're taking, District 2, District 4, District 11, 3, 12, 1. So kind of giving people a snapshot of like what teams are going to qualify for the playoffs, and that starts with the district power rankings. So yeah, we're gonna focus on that tomorrow night, 7:30 on YouTube. Me and my buddy Dave Micah probably have some guests to talk about some of the games as well. Bob Long will be a contributor, so good stuff there. Fresh set of downs, presented by EasternPAFootball.com.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in and joining us tonight. If you have watched the show, you obviously know where to find us on YouTube. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or my articles on SteelCityBlitz.com, where we now have the updated Wpial standings page that will be fully updated as we move through the rest of the season with all of the playoffs, the playoff clinchings, the proper order based on all the tiebreakers and all that, and games of the week articles and everything else. So check it out, SteelCityBlitz.com, and thanks everyone for tuning in this week. And we're looking forward to a really fun stretch run here as we head into the playoffs.
And conference play. I mean, literally, I don't think that from across the board, we haven't had 1 week yet where there's been, every conference been in, league play. So I'm just looking forward to having regular league play. And I think that there are a lot of stories that are going to be told as we get into league play. So for my buddy Ian, hey, I'm Bruce Badgley. Listen, thanks for all of you for tuning into the WPIAL Blitz Show, and we will see you again next Monday at 9:30. Thank you, and drive safely. Good night, everybody.